Hi again, everybody. It's the History Nerd. I'm back in the man cave, and in this video, I'm going to compare the 10X Stetson open road straw hat with the 6X Stetson open road straw hat, and hopefully help you decide which of these two hats works best for you if you're ever in the market for one. Now, usually I like to start my videos by giving you a little background on the hats that I'm talking about. But I've already done that. In a previous video, I reviewed the Stetson Open Road Royal Deluxe felt hat. And that video included a pretty lengthy history about the open road. So I will link that video in the description below, and you can go check it out if that sounds of interest to you. I do want to start this video, though, by talking just quickly about the history of wearing straw hats and how it has changed so dramatically over time. Today, the guidelines are basically very loose guidelines. You start wearing your straw hat right around Easter, and you switch to your felt hat right around Labor Day. The reason being is a straw hat keeps your head cool in the spring and summer, and a felt hat keeps your head warm in the fall and winter. But look, this is 2023. If you wear a straw hat in the winter and a felt hat in the summer, ain't nobody going to say anything to you or bother you about it one bit. That was not always the case. Back in the early 20th century, when every man, from the richest, most powerful Wall Street banker to the most common laborer, a ditch digger, a grave digger, they all wore hats every day. And the rules were much stricter. If you didn't follow the rules in the early 20th century, you could literally get your ass whooped. And I'm going to tell you about it. May 15th was known nationally in the early 20th century as National Straw Hat Day. Newspapers would run full sections on National Straw Hat Day, and men's shops would take out ads saying, now is the time to come buy your straw hat because you put your felt hat in the closet on May 15th and start wearing your straw hat. And men did that. They conformed to the rules. Most men would buy 2 straw hats just prior to National Straw Hat Day. The reason being, number one, straw hats were relatively cheap back then. They were handmade, they were made of straw, but they were relatively cheap compared to felt hats. The second reason was if you wore a straw hat every day, the straw hats back then, you would perspire in them, and straw does not handle prolonged exposure to moisture very well. And the straw hats back then would also hold odors. So it's hard to have a straw hat hold up if you're wearing it every day while you're working throughout all of spring and summer. So men would buy 2 straw hats. Traditionally, on the 4th of July, men by the thousands who lived near big cities would attend the nearest Major League Baseball game. And they would all wear their straw boater hats that men wore at the time. I'm talking late teens, early 20s. And there's photos where you see thousands of men wearing their boaters all together, waiting to get into a baseball stadium. They would watch the game, and at the end of the game, the men in unison would take off their hats and sail them onto the field until the baseball diamond was covered with thousands of straw hats. Then the men would go home and they would pull out their second straw hat that would last them throughout the rest of the summer. Now, at the end of the summer, what they would do in towns that had zoos, the local city zoo would ask men, please don't throw away your straw hat. Donate it to the zoo, because they would remove the hat band and the sweat band from the straw hats, and they would put the straw hats in the elephant enclosure, and the elephants like to stomp on the straw hats and then eat them. And it saved the zoo money because they didn't have to buy feed for the elephants as long as they had an abundance of straw hats to feed them. Now, this is where it gets really interesting. May 15th was National Straw Hat Day, so likewise, September 15th was National Felt Hat Day. That was the day where men all across the country switched to their felt hats. And again, men's shops would run ads saying National Felt Hat Day is approaching. Get your felt hat now for the fall and winter. But as I said, they were stickler for rules back then. And if a man wore a straw hat past September 15th, it was not uncommon for a thug, a bully, to grab the straw hat off of a man's head and punch a hole through it. It was a daily occurrence. It was common. Any man who wore a straw hat past September 15th ran the risk of having somebody trying to grab their hat and punch a hole through it. That, of course, led to many fights. But the worst occurrence of that happened in 1922, when on September 13th, 2 days before National Felt Hat Day, roving gangs of juvenile delinquents and youth gangs went to the factory area of Lower Manhattan and grabbed the hat of every factory worker who was wearing a straw hat and destroyed their hats. The factory workers didn't fight back very much, so the juvenile delinquents and youth gangs left the factories and went to the docks in Manhattan. Well, y'all, this is some advice, free advice from History Nerds Man Cave. If you grab the hat of a dock worker, a guy who loads cargo for a living, if you grab his hat and try to destroy it, it's a pretty good prescription for having him stomp your butt into a mud hole and walking it dry. Unlike the factory workers, the dock workers fought back, and a riot ensued. The Manhattan Bridge had to be shut down by law enforcement to traffic because there were so many people fighting each other on the Manhattan Bridge over this prank that the juvenile gangs tried to pull on the dock workers. So that's September 13th. It got worse on September 14th. What happened was all of the youth gangs and juveniles who didn't participate in the activities of the 13th heard about them or read about them in the paper and said, hey, that sounds fun. So they too decided to go harass men wearing straw hats, even though National Felt Hat Day wasn't until the next day. There were gangs that walked around with clubs that had nails embedded in them. And if they tried to grab a straw hat off of a man and he grabbed his hat back or tried to stop them, they would beat him with these clubs with the nails embedded in them. And many men went to the hospital as a result of these beatings. One man even died because some hooligans grabbed his hat. He tried to grab it back. They tussled. He fell. He hit his head on the pavement, and he died. And that event is known as the Straw Hat RIot of 1922. And if you Google it, there's lots of interesting stories about that event. So I would encourage you, go to Google, type in Straw Hat RIot of 1922, and read in more detail the story that I have just shared with you. Well, that brings us to these hats, the 10X Stetson Open Road and the 10X. Now, some of you may recognize this 10X Stetson Open Road. This is a hat that my wife mail ordered for me for Christmas from a chain called Cavender's. When it was en route from Cavender's to my front porch, Federal Express decided to apparently put it in a spin cycle with a sack full of rocks or something because when it arrived at my house, it was crushed pretty badly and unwearable. My wife called Cavender's and said, I need to exchange this damaged hat that arrived. And Cavender's said, ma'am, we do not have a single one of those hats in the giant 7 3/4 size that your husband's watermelon-sized head requires, and we don't know when we're getting one. But they told her what she could do is take this hat to the nearest Cavender's, and the hat shaper at the Cavender's could steam it back into the correct shape and get the damage out of it. Well, that's what we ultimately decided to do. My wife took it to Cavender's. They did a pretty good job, but they did not raise the crown high enough, and the points in the cattleman's crease were so prominent and a little cattywampus that when I looked at the hat, it looked to me like one of those pink P-word hats that those gals who didn't like Donald Trump wore during his presidency. And look, this is not a political channel. I am not being political. All of us, God bless us, all of us have a right to our own political opinions. But y'all, I didn't want to spend the spring and summer walking around feeling like I was wearing a straw P-word hat on my head. So I took this hat back to Cavender's and gave it back to the hat shaper, and I told him to please steam the P right out of this hat, which he did, and it looks much better now. So let's begin by talking about the similarities between the 6X and 10X Stetson Open Road. Some straw hats are made from Tokia straw, which is the finest straw that can be woven very tightly. It comes from the Tokia palm in Ecuador, and Tokia straw hats can easily run you over $1,000 at some places. It's the finest straw in the world. These hats are not made from Tokia straw. Some hats are made from raffia straw, R-A-F-F-I-A. It's just fun to go raffia straw, which comes from the raffia palm of Madagascar, whose leaves can grow as long as 80 feet in length. These are not made from raffia straw. Some straw hats are made from seagrass, and seagrass cannot be woven very tightly, but seagrass is used to thriving in wet and warm environments like you find around the sea. And if you see golfers wearing straw hats on the course that are not very tightly woven, those are likely seagrass hats because they can stand up well to the perspiration and exposure that the golfers put the hats through. These are not seagrass hats. Some hats are also made from hemp. Hemp is antimicrobial, doesn't hold odors. It's a very good-looking material to make a hat from. And while Stetson makes both the Open Road and the Stratoliner Fedora in a hemp hat, these are not made from hemp. These hats are made from Shantung straw. And I can read your mind now. The thought going through your head is, what in the blue hell is Shantung straw? Well, I have the answer for you. Shantung straw first appeared in the 1st century by the Chinese. Then the Koreans adopted it, and the Japanese perfected it in 610 AD. The Japanese called this kind of straw washi, W-A-S-H-I, which translates to paper. The reason being, the Japanese learned you could take paper, high-performance paper made from rice starch, writing paper, compress it together, put it under great pressure. the paper would bind together and make these long strips that could then be cut into a straw-like substance. And washi straw is really paper made to appear to look like straw. The name was later changed from washi, because nobody wants to admit it's paper, to Shantung straw. And Shantung relates to rough texture, basically. But you will see on some hats, they will say on the sweatband, genuine Shantung straw. Y'all, that means it's a genuine paper hat. You will see genuine Shantung Panama straw. That means it is a paper hat they've stuck the name Panama on the end of to make you think it's a nicer hat than it really is. So both these hats are made from paper straw. And what they do is when they get done making the hat, they put this shellac-like substance on it that helps the hat stand up to perspiration and rain. Otherwise, if you wear a paper hat outside and it gets wet, it's basically going to melt on your head. So these are coated in such a manner that they will stand up. You can't go in a drenching rain. You can't sweat all through them all summer, but they will stand up pretty well. The other thing these hats have in common, they are both have a 4-inch crown, just like the felt open roads. They have a 2 3/4-inch brim, just like the felt ones. They have the grosgrain ribbons and the Stetson hat pins on them. The 6X here has a black leather sweatband with John B. Stetson Company, made in the USA, and then Stetson with the 6 X's embossed on the leather hat band. This one has a brown sweatband. It too says John B. Stetson Company, made in the USA, and it has the 10 X's embossed along with the name Stetson, and both of them have labels on the inside. That kind of gives you the overview of how these hats are alike. How are they different? That's where we get down to the lick log. One is a 6X, one is a 10X. You're probably wondering, if you don't know a lot about hats, what does that mean? I know in a felt hat, the X scale denotes the quality of the fur used to make the felt. And if you have a lot of X's in a hat, it means that it's got beaver or mink or some high-end fur in the felt. If you don't have many X's, it means you probably got some wild hair fur or some nutria fur or wool. As I've said before many times, Stetson and Resistol, if you buy a hat in 2023, anything that's 4X or below is a wool felt hat, not a fur felt hat. So what does that have to do with a straw hat that has no felt or fur in it? Well, in a straw hat, the X's denote the width of the straw and the tightness and quality of the weave. What I have done, I have taken a picture, close-up photo of each of these hats from the same distance and put them side by side. And you can compare the two. The white one is the 6X, the tan one is the 10X. You can see that the 6X, the straw, the paper, is wider and not as tightly or as well woven as the 10X, which has thinner straw, a better weave, a more decorative weave, and because the straw is thinner, it requires more of it to make a hat. So that's why you have a 6X and a 10X, the width of the straw and the quality and tightness of the weave. not the weed. The other difference is the color. This hat comes in this color. It's called the natural. It's kind of an off-white. That's what color the 6X comes in. You can't get it in any other color than the off-white. The 10X comes in the natural color, this color, which is toast, a dark brown known as chocolate. Why don't they just say tan and brown? Why don't they have to say toast and chocolate? And a taupe color, which is kind of a greenish gray. It's kind of a weird looking color, but the 10X also comes in taupe. The other obvious difference you can see in these hats is the 10X comes vented, which is important, I think, in a straw hat. They tell you to always wear a hat in the winter because most of the heat escapes your body from the top of your head, and that's why they say always wear a hat in winter. Well, the same is true in the summer. And if you're wearing a straw hat trying to cool off or not wear a hot hat, this hat would trap the heat escaping your head more because it's not vented and it's covered in shellac and the heat really doesn't have anywhere to go. The 10X is vented, so you can get some air in, you can get the heat out, and it does a better job of keeping your head cool. And finally, the difference in these hats is the 6X is $90 retail. The 10X is $135 retail. And the hemp version I told you about earlier is $155 retail. I don't have one of those hats, so I can't tell you anything about it. Let me give you my personal assessment about these hats. This is a $90 hat. It's a good hat. I'm pleased that I paid $90 for this hat. I bought this hat before my wife bought this hat. And while this is a good $90 hat, if you're going to buy one, I would recommend just go ahead and spend the $45 extra for the 10X over the 6X because this hat is that much better. It's vented, it looks better, it's woven better. Really, if you're going to pay $90 for that hat, just go ahead and pay the other $45 and upgrade to the 10X version. I will tell you another reason why I prefer this hat to the 6X. As I have gotten older and my beard has gotten grayer, I have noticed that whenever I put this hat on my head, I look more and more like the beard of knowledge dude from the Pawn Stars TV show. And y'all, he's a smart guy and knows his stuff, but I really don't want to look like the beard of knowledge. So there you go, folks. We have looked under the hood and kicked the tires of both the 6X and 10X Stetson Open Road straw hats. I recommend the 10X, but if you don't want to spend $135 on a hat and want to stay under $100, the 6X will do just fine for you. So that's the video. As always, I'm going to ask you to do 3 things for me. I need you to hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and ring that bell so your bat phone will light up the next time I post a video and you can follow the continuing exciting adventures of History Nerds Man Cave. So in closing, let me encourage all of you to be good, be well, be happy, and goodbye, folks.